So we're going to look at the case study. There's going to be a spreadsheet. Now, the link is what is shown on this page. And we're going to look at the number of emissions based on different companies and various sectors. So we explore a spreadsheet. So let's dive into this. So this spreadsheet is from the Office of National Statistics from the UK government data. So we explore this sample. So what we have here is the spreadsheet, which has been downloaded from the link which was shown previously, and it's from the Office for National Statistics in the UK, which looks at the greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2021. So the various types of gases, the explanation here. So CO2, carbon dioxide, CH4, methane, and so on and so forth. So we look at the total emissions. We can see the various sectors overall between 1990. So as we go along to 2021, we can see from the various sectors, the emissions from the various sectors. So we can see that again, the greenhouse gas emissions total year on year. So if you explore the CO2 as an example, again, we can see from the agricultural sector from 1990 to 2021. So we can see the emissions for the UK. We can see the emissions have been reducing. If you compare to 1990, for example, the emissions have been reducing, and the government's aim is to keep on reducing to between 2030 and 2050 net zero targets. So we can see the various sectors as a breakdown. So perhaps an opportunity to explore the various greenhouse gases and the sectors. So which of these, from your company perspective, where does your company operate? Do they operate in agriculture, manufacturing? You can explore these to see how emissions is reducing within your sector. So we explore this case study, which looks at scope 3 data for various sectors. Now, there are times when companies do not have the measured data in scope 3, which sometimes can majority be in the supply chain or the value chain. So the benefit of this case study is looking at representation. If your company doesn't have the scope 3 data, you have a representation of data, what that could look like for your sector. So let's dive into this. So what we have here is the Science-Based Target Initiative. One of their resources is they've broken down the various sectors from, say, food and beverage, banks, real estate, and so on and so forth. So what they've done is they've looked at the percentage of scope 3 emissions per category. So these are the categories of scope 3 emissions. So they've been able to use their data of the most committed and approved companies as of 2018. And based on that data, they have a breakdown of the emissions within the sector. So we have the technology, hardware, to software companies, to retail, and so on and so forth. So have a look at these sectors and you can see breakdown. So you have, for example, purchase goods, capital goods, employee, upstream, and so on and so forth. So have your company already established the data within its scope 3 emissions? If not, do these representation provide a good resource in terms of understanding what the emissions could look like within your scope 3? For a lot of companies, scope 3 emissions, there are estimates that show scope 3 emissions apart from the carbon intensive industries like the cement or the energy companies. Then for a lot of companies like the retail, then scope 3 emissions are likely to be over 50%. Some estimates even look at around 70%. So again, for such a significant part of the emissions, having a breakdown. So again, at a starting point, when a company doesn't have the data, they can use this as a representation to conduct a gap analysis and determine where the key hotspots are. So further on, in a separate data from the MSCI company, where they've done the ESG research, then they've been able to have a carbon emission intensity breaking down to scope 1 and 2 versus the scope 3 emissions. So we can see clearly that scope 3 emissions is more than the scope 1 and 2 emissions combined. And also you can see the breakdown: scope 3 emissions upstream and scope 3 emissions downstream. Upstream is the activities towards the company's operations and the activities from the company's operations. Nonetheless, companies are advised to calculate and quantify to be specific with their emissions. So further on, with the same MSCI ESG research document, then you have the further breakdown of emissions by category. So this time just looking at just the scope 3 emissions, and you have the various industries like energy, financials, materials, real estate, and so on and so forth, and the categories of the scope 3 emissions. So you have category 1 and 2, purchase and capital goods, all the way through to processing of sold goods, use of sold products, through to franchises and investments. So we can see from the energy companies where the various breakdown is, to real estate, and so on and so forth. How does this look from your industry? Have you already measured your emissions, and do these compare with the data being shown by MSCI Scope 3 data?